Let's talk about how to get started with a rehab, just so that you have that. I think you need to give yourself a quiz, and that quiz is, should you or should you not rehab? Doesn't mean when you look at an asset, when you look at a single-family house, a small multifamily property, and you look at that property, you should be asking yourself, does this need rehab or does it not? Could I take this property and assign it to somebody else and not do a thing to it, but assign it to them with the idea of them rehabbing it? Those are some of the things that you should think about prior to jumping into a project. I think it's very important. So I know you may not, I'm going to go through these, so don't worry about the small print, okay? But I just want to go through some of these terms, okay? Assignment of contract. When a person or entity transfers their rights and obligations in a contract to another party, often for a fee. Let's talk about that for a moment. Sometimes you'll be looking at an asset and you'll say, hey, I can tie this property up, but I don't necessarily want to close on it. I want to sell it or transfer this contract for a fee to somebody else. You can do that because you have what is called an equitable right to that property. You don't own it, but you control it, but you definitely have an equitable right. You've got something of value with that. You've got the contract. So you might see a deal in which you tie up and you say, you know, I'm not interested in rehabbing this myself due to time or my other projects or location or whatever it is. But I know Joe Smith down the street would love to rehab that. I'm going to sign the contract to him for an assignment fee and let him or her do the rehab. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. A bird dog or a scout, somebody that finds you properties for a finder's fee. Now, if you're working within the states, some of the states have laws against that. So make sure you check within that state if you can pay a person a bird dog fee for that, or a scout fee. Basis. Now this is for tax purposes. What is your basis? If you buy a property for $50,000 and you put $20,000 of rehab into it, you've got $70,000 total. Your basis on that property is $50,000. If you sell that property for, let's say, $90,000, your basis is $50,000, you've got $20,000 in rehab, your gain is $20,000. Does that make sense to everybody? I want you to realize that. Understand your basis is your purchase price on the property, but obviously you're not going to be taxed on your expenses that you put into the property. So if your net is $20,000 after that, $50,000, put $20,000 into it, sell it for $90,000, your residual, what you have left, or your gain, is $20,000. That would be your taxable amount. Certificate of occupancy. Anytime you're doing a rehab, you're going to have a permitting process. And you're going to get a general contractor's permit, or at least whoever is working on that property is. You might pull plumbing permits, electrical permits, demolition permit. And before somebody can move into that property, you're going to have to get a certificate of occupancy with that. So make sure that you kind of know the local ordinances and local rules. They vary by municipality, city, town. They also vary by county and by state. So make sure you're aware of that. Yes, we got a question. Does that depend on the amount of rehab? So his question is, does that depend on the amount of rehab? Sometimes. It really depends on the city. Sometimes they get very particular on demolition, for instance. If you're just taking out a toilet and replacing that, sometimes you may not need a permit for that. Other times you might. So please check with your municipality. Also, if you're in, say, like a historical district, you're going to have to get approval from the Historical Society as to what type of rehabbing you can do. So you really need to take some time and do some research on that. Okay? Comparables. Similar properties in close proximity to the subject property used to determine the value of a particular piece of real estate. When you're doing rehabs, make sure that you're considerate of something called ARV, after repair value. And the reason and how you get your after repair value is by looking at comparables. With single-family homes up to 4-unit buildings, they use a valuation system called sales comparable approach. So what an appraiser does is they come in and they take your subject property and they look and scan the local market, usually a 1 up to a 3-mile radius, and they see what is sold in that marketplace that compares to your property. That typically is what is assigned very close to what the value is of your subject property. So make sure before you go and do a rehab project, you're looking at comparables in your marketplace as is and after rehab. I think it'll really help you establish your after repair or after rehab value. Okay? Question in the back. So his question is, how do you know that a property wasn't half rehabbed or all rehabbed? That's why you need to rely on your local team, your real estate agents. One of the things that you'll know from our experience yesterday is those agents really knew their market. They could take a look at the houses in the marketplace and in the area. As a matter of fact, when we were driving, we heard often, I sold a house down the street there. I sold this house for $115,000. So they really know the local market information. That's number one. Number two, appraisers. Appraisers know the market even better than that. So don't be afraid to call an appraiser, to use an appraiser in your comparable search to find an accurate ARV, after repair value, for that. They're the ones that are going to give you that information. Okay? Good questions. Yes?
Yeah, you said like an appraiser is probably around $300 to $400 or something.
To appraise in a property, yes.
But all they're doing is getting comparables. So does that really a lot of value? Like as far as what information can they provide that someone, that a realtor or a property manager that provided similar comparables would be able to?
Yeah, so his question is, what information could an appraiser provide that a broker or agent could not provide? Well, you could get a comparable market analysis from a real estate agent, or a broker price opinion from a broker, which a comparable market analysis is the first step in finding comparables. A BPO, or a broker price opinion, is like a more detailed approach. A broker spends more time on it, gives you a little bit more detailed information, spends more time looking for the comps. An appraisal, full-blown appraisal, is even more in detail than that. So every step means that you're getting more detailed information, not only about the houses that sold, when they sold, they spend more time looking, so it's just more detail is what you're getting. Yes?
We also provide more clout when you go to a bank or some type of finance.
Pierre's asking, does it provide more clout when you go to a banker or go to get finance? I think if you're looking to market this property or looking to bring in a partner or get a lender on this, the more research that you've done and the more level of detail that you've done really kind of supports the investment that you're looking at. So, a BPO would trump a comparative market analysis. A full-blown appraisal would trump a BPO. So the more detail that you can get, I think the better. Okay? Okay, finder's fee, a fee paid normally paid to a scout or bird dog for finding a property for someone to buy or a tenant to occupy a property. Again, be careful with that because certain states won't allow you to do that without a real estate license. So make sure that you do your research there. A FSBO, for sale by owner. We talked a little bit about this yesterday. And the idea with a FSBO is being for sale by owner is this is a property that hasn't really gotten to a sales professional yet. So maybe the owner hasn't really priced his or her property effectively. So I think you've got a better chance of finding a deal at the FSBO level a lot of times than you do with an agent, or maybe than you do looking at Home Path or Home Steps. So please don't ignore that opportunity. As a matter of fact, we were driving around yesterday. I saw a few FSBO properties. If that was my target market, I would be calling them. What's your property like? What's the sales price on it? Why are you selling? That type of thing. Holding cost, very, very important to the rehabber, holding cost. Costs associated with holding a property such as interest, taxes, insurance, and utilities, but also your mortgage payment, be it to a bank, an investor, hard money lender, that type of thing. You've really got to consider what your average holding time is going to be for that property and build that into your cost. Very, very important. Not a lot of people do that. And when they don't do that, that's what really determines whether they're going to have success or not. Okay? Lease option, a rental situation in which a tenant has an option to purchase, just like we talked earlier on the options, an option to purchase a property anytime in a specified time period. This is a unilateral contract where the tenant may choose not to buy, but the owner must sell if the tenant chooses to exercise the option. This may be a strategy that you want to work very much like the option. If you set up a lease option agreement for something that is a property that needs to be rehabbed, for instance, and you say, if I can find a lease option tenant, put a tenant in there, give them a lease option for an agreed upon price in the future, that tenant might be able to do the repairs or rehab. I'll sell it to him or her down the line, and it's up to them to decide whether or not they want to exercise that option. Okay, so there may be an opportunity as well there for you. Market value, the real value of a property, the price at which a buyer is willing to buy and a seller is willing to sell. I really focus on market value when you're looking at properties today, specifically when you're going to be rehabbing it. Now, I see in a lot of people's marketing campaigns, they'll say this property sold for, X in 2006 or 2007. Do not get caught up in what the property sold for in 2006 and 2007. From the selling side, nice ploy. From the buying side, you want to understand what that value of that property is right now when you're buying it. I would also be concerned if you're in a market in which the value is going to be going up over the next year based on supply and demand, or you're in a market in which the value is going to be going down in the next year. That will affect your purchase price, so make sure that you take that into consideration. Multiple listing service, the MLS, a network of real estate listings organized by real estate agents and brokers used to help market properties. When you are looking for properties in your specific market and you're dealing with your real estate agent, typically they will have a public portion of the MLS that you can get on. Now, typically the MLS in that section is going to be all properties for sale, not just the ones that have been foreclosed through Fannie and Freddie, like in HomePath and HomeSteps, but all of the properties, the ones that have not been foreclosed on, the ones that have been foreclosed on but are not part of Fannie and Freddie. So make sure you don't ignore the local MLS. Questions with that at all? Okay. An option fee. A fee usually non-refundable, paid for a party to have the right to buy a piece of real estate. We talked about this earlier this morning. It gives the person with the option the right, but not the obligation to buy that property in a future time period. An REO, bank-owned real estate or real estate owned. Real estate owned by banks or financial institutions, usually acquired in a foreclosure process. A lot of people, when they're looking for rehabs, will look at either foreclosures or bank REOs. There is a difference. A foreclosure is a property that is part of a legal process that is being foreclosed on. It's a process that is typically driven by state laws or county laws. And a foreclosure is typically sold at the county courthouse steps as an auction. If that property does not sell, that property goes back to the bank or the other financial institution as an REO, bank-owned property, and that typically gets marketed by a real estate agent. Okay? Seasoning, an issue lenders have with persons quickly selling properties or refinancing at a higher amount than the original purchase price. The sale or refinance is not seasoned, so the investor must often justify the higher price to get qualified for the loan based on a higher price. Now, Back in 2005 and 2006, 2007, what was happening was you'd have buyer A buy a property, and the next day sell it to buyer B for $20,000 more. Now, because of that, a lot of times that $20,000 wasn't necessarily justified. It was just, the energy of the almost auction, so to speak. There were so many buyers because there was so much available money that people were just buying properties left and right. Because of the demand outpaced the supply, the price rose relatively quickly. In that transition, a lot of times with all those properties, they had things that were happening that were not so legal. So today, in 2012, banks have really, and financial institutions have really looked at seasoning as an issue. Sometimes they want you to hold the property for 6 months or hold it for a year and justify why the value of that place is higher. If you are doing a rehab, I would recommend getting an appraisal before buying the property, doing the rehab, and doing another appraisal. I think that is the justification for you for a higher value that you're going to need if you're refinancing the property. Very important that you do that. Subject 2. Yes, question.
Why not just get the appraisal after the rehab?
I did say that. I just said that. You're going to get an appraisal before the rehab when you buy?
Do one before?
Because you want to justify that you're buying it, it's worth $50,000, you're buying it at $50,000, you put in $20,000 in rehab, and now you get an appraisal and the property's worth $90,000. If you go to refinance that property, a bank is going to want to see both appraisals as to what you did. And I think that's proper justification for them. Okay? Yes?
Can't you get a break on price if you use the same appraisal?
I'm sorry?
Can't you get a break on the price if you use the same appraisal?
Could you get a break on the price of the appraisal? If your bank has an issue with that, maybe there's a conflict of interest, you want to check on that first. If not, then yes, because they're just upgrading the information, you should be able to get a break on that. By the way, when you're dealing with an appraiser at the beginning of a property and your plan is to rehab, make sure you're telling that appraiser, hey, listen, I want you to give me an appraisal now. We're going to be rehabbing the property, and in 6 months, I want you to do an upgrade appraisal. Sometimes they call the first appraisal an as-is appraisal. So yes, you could get possibly a discount. Yes?
By following that methodology that you described, are you likely to reduce your seasoning period? That's going to be more likely to...
That would be up to the banks. I think if you're refining with, banks that have a Canadian influence, a BMO, an RBC, typically they want you to wait 6 months. It's going to be hard to get around that. However, you're going to be rehabbing the property, so it's going to take some time anyway. So 6 months is probably standard. I would bank that in, unless you're dealing with a bank that is looking at 1 year seasoning. Okay? So that'd be a great question to ask your financial institution. Yes?
Are all appraisals treated equally by the bank, or do they have an approved list of appraisals?
All banks have an approved list of appraisers. So you want to make sure that you find out who that is specifically to who you're using. Okay? If your bank is going to be refinancing the property, they may actually institute the idea of the bank needs to actually choose the appraiser rather than you. That might also cause a conflict of interest, so check on that as well. Okay. Wholesaler. A person who buys or ties up under contract a piece of real estate and flips it to another investor for below market price. I don't know if you caught this yesterday, but on bus 1, we had the real estate agents talking about some wholesalers in town. All they focus on is buying properties at the auction. So they buy them at a wholesale price, they virtually do very little to them, and they sell them to another investor, or they flip them to another investor at less than retail. So that might be a great way for you to look at opportunities in your target market, is to deal with wholesalers. Okay?